RKW is brewed by 8th Roast with Ramon Foster and Kayla Anderson. I'm Will Bowling. Justin Melo covers the Titans for Broadway Sports Media, covers the NFL Draft for the Draft Network. Guy's everywhere, writing about everybody, and he joins us right now here on the show. What's up, Justin? How are you?
Doing well, man. Excited that Combine Week has finally arrived. We know it's one of the most overreactionary weeks on the NFL calendar year, certainly on the pre-draft calendar. So it's going to be an exciting one. Excited to comb through these risers and fallers here.
Well, Justin, I enjoy following your work at JustinM_NFL on Twitter. The guy talks to like every prospect in the NFL draft. It's really cool to follow. As you look towards this week, Justin, and look at the Titans' needs specifically, how good of a spot are they in at 7, and how many great options do you feel like they have this year specifically?
Well, I think they're in a really good spot because I'll tell you what, if you ask anyone around the league, what are the 2 deepest position groups in the 2024 NFL draft? I think 9 out of 10 people would tell you offensive tackle and wide receiver. And as we know there in Nashville, it happens to be the Titans' 2 biggest needs, right, on the roster right now, especially with an offensive-minded coach coming in who seemingly wants to install a pass-happier offense than we've seen in recent years. I expect them to have multiple options at number 7. One great development for them is the rise of all the quarterbacks, right? I think certainly a few weeks ago, we were fairly certain that, 3 quarterbacks were going to go in the top 6. Well, now it's looking like we might have a 4th. With Michigan's J.J. McCarthy, who's getting a lot of buzz right now in NFL circles. So when the Titans come on the clock at 7, I wouldn't be stunned if they've got, 1 or 2 receivers to choose from, Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze. And certainly they may even have their pick of the litter at offensive tackle, between Joe Alt and Olufanu, the perceived top 2 tackles in this class. So I think there's a chance the Titans will actually have to make their Penny Sewell versus Jamar Chase decision that's sort of been making its rounds on Twitter. It'll be interesting to see which direction they go in.
Justin Melo, the Draft Network and Broadway Sports Media, our guest. Justin, how do you separate those 2 tackles, Olufanu and Joe Alt, and which one is a better fit for Bill Callahan to work with?
Well, I think they're fairly different. Of course, there are some similarities, but right off the bat, the first thing I would tell you, and I think most would agree, is that between the 2, Olufanu is the better pass protector, and Joe Alt is the better run blocker. Okay, now both of them are very good athletes. When I say this, I don't want to sell Joe Alt short. Both of them are good athletes. I think Fashanu's a very rare athlete. Okay, I think a lot of what he's done up to this point, he's gotten by on being an easy mover, and the athleticism is off the charts. Now, that's not to say necessarily that he's raw, but I do think he leans on the athletic traits, whereas Joe Alt, I think, leans more on his technical abilities. I think Bill Callahan would be thrilled to work with either one. Again, when you got the moldable athletic traits of Olufanu, you've got someone that's already very good in pass protection. And again, if you're installing that pass-happy offense that they may be, you like that fit. On the other side of things, I can't help but get over the thought that Joe Alt might be the better fit next to Peter Skoronski. I think both of them are very dominant run blockers. Remember the old run left hat that Mike Vrabel used to wear? I almost see it making a comeback if this team drafts Joe Alt and pairs him with Skoronski on that left side. You'd have 2 extremely technically refined players, making up the left side of your line. That's what I think about when I think of Bill Callahan. Too many are focused on, well, they can take a bunch of raw guys and Bill Callahan's going to work miracles. No, Bill Callahan still wants to work with guys that have the traits and know what they are doing, right? So that's what I think of when I think of Bill Callahan. I think of getting guys that are extremely technically proficient and then watching how he could elevate their game. That's why I'm excited to see him work with Peter Skoronski, and I'd certainly be just as excited if they get Joe Alt in that room.
Justin Melo of the Draft Network with us this morning talking some of these prospects as Combine Week is upon us. With that being said, when it comes down to Joe Alt and Olufanu, how big of a drop-off is there from those 2 guys and everybody else if the Titans do decide to go wide receiver at that number 7 pick instead of tackle?
Well, I think they're very clearly the 2 top prospects, at least on my board. And I know not everyone agrees. There are some other good ones. But if you're talking about what their options are going to be at 38, I think the drop-off is fairly significant, right? I think now you're looking at guys that are certainly a lot more raw than those two. Guys that have the multiple traits and that you hope Bill Callahan can bring everything else out of them. I think of a guy like Patrick Paul at Houston, who is an outstanding rare athlete, has vines for arms, but is still putting it together. I think of the BYU tackle is the same thing. Those are the two guys that I see potentially being available at 38th overall. I got Jordan Morgan from Arizona as a back-end first, but maybe that's late enough where, he makes it to the mid-30s. That's another guy. The arm length was a little disappointing at the Senior Bowl. I think just clocked in at 33 inches, but it's not prohibitive, right? He can play tackle with that length, and I think he will play tackle with that length. He's a bit different than the others because he's got a more experience. I think he's technically better than some of the others that I just mentioned. But certainly, I think the tackle drop-off from 7 to 38 is fairly large. My favorite thing about the NFL draft, we know it's not an exact science, right? It's not. And we get it wrong all the time. General managers make millions of dollars a year to get it right, and they get it wrong all the time. But those two at the top, they are very, very technically advanced for the most part, whereas I think the options at 38, you're working with slightly more of a in-the-works sort of project.
With the changing of the guard here in Nashville, as far as head coach, offensive coordinator, and just everything about the Titans, when we speak about their wide receiver position, though, if they do decide to go there, if they move back and take one first, what type of wide receiver are the Titans looking for, you think, as far as size? Is it just speed? Is it just playmaking ability? Because in years past, it's been about, well, can you block for the run game here in Nashville? And I think that's somewhat changing.
It certainly feels like it's going to change a little bit. Look, I think all we could draw from is Brian Callahan's experiences in Cincinnati. How much input did he have in that? Probably a little, but certainly not everything. But you look at some of the guys they targeted. I mean, Jamar Chase is a special case, right? You had the chemistry with Joe Burrow. He was really a no-brainer prospect, I think, at number 5 overall where they took him. But then you look at T. Higgins, right, a guy that was a second-rounder, and you start to think that there is a bit of a type that they have, right? I think they want big-bodied, dominant guys on the boundary. I think Chase and Higgins both fit that description, and they both also have a vertical playmaking ability. Certainly Chase a better separator than T. Higgins, but they weren't afraid of that when it came to T. I look at a guy like Keon Coleman out of Florida State, who I think has a very similar athletic profile to T. Higgins, even from a body type perspective, and the ability to sort of win at the catch point and dominate corners even without creating a ton of separation. And by the way, Keon Coleman represented by the same agent that represents Jeffrey Simmons. So there's really good rapport there between, Rand Carthon and Keon Coleman's agent. So that's an interesting one. But certainly I think when you look at the history, big-bodied vertical playmakers, guys that win at the catch point, are physically impressive, seem to have been Callahan's type in Cincinnati.
We've had this conversation. Justin Melo of the Draft Network joining us in the RK Tub, leading up to the Combine. And Justin, when it comes to this year, and maybe even look at last year, with you having NIL now, guys going back possibly because they're making money now, how big of the drop-off have you seen? Because you're looking at all these prospects, and you do a great job at that. How big is the drop-off maybe after the 4th round? Because let's remember, the Titans without a 3rd-round pick, that kind of puts them in an interesting position.
Well, I do think there's a significantly big drop-off. And I had a lot of conversations about that with the executive director of the Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy, who talked about, he opened up to the media and said, look, as soon as we got past the first 100 guys on our board, we at times had a difficult time, sorting through the invites and how quickly you were getting from 4th rounders to guys that we had a 6th or 7th round or even an undrafted grade on. I wish I had the number in front of me, but I know you're talking about the impact NIL has made. This year at the Combine, we've got the smallest percentage of small school prospects that I believe we've ever had. Now, how do you define small school? That's up to the masses, I guess, but they've got the smallest percentage this year, and that's what that's the result of? A lot of them were once at small schools. right? But if you make a name for yourself at that small school, you're hitting that transfer portal, you're chasing the NIL money at bigger programs, right? So I think the drop-off is very significant. The COVID year impact has also played a big role in that. But certainly no one I've spoken to has described this as a deep, 6-7 round draft. We've heard about teams that may try to package those picks and see if they can come up, or even trade them to next year. Just essentially forego a pick this year to get one in next year's draft, where the perception is it's going to be a lot deeper. So I do think the reality is the Titans are probably not in a great spot there with not having a third rounder and having a couple extra day 3 picks. So you certainly wonder if Rand Carthon tries to move out of one of those picks, 7 or 38, move back and pick up that third-round pick that they no longer have, or if they try to package, even getting back into the 4th round, packaging a couple of those day 3 picks and trying to get to the early mid portion of the 4th, should certainly be something that's probably on his mind.
And okay, so let's say you do that, Justin. We've talked about, the tackle and the wide receiver. Let's get to the defense, because last year they didn't draft one defensive player. They've got to do something this year to at least boast up their secondary. Inside linebacker is kind of a concern if you look at that position. What do you think you do with what's available there?
Well, I certainly think corner and linebacker are going to be positions, if they do go defense on day 3, that they have to target, right? I think that first day draft capital, second day, is probably going to be focused heavily on offense, as we just said. But as you get to the later portions, they got to find some guys that can play defense for them. And there are a couple of them. Trevin Wallace, linebacker out of Kentucky, was at the Senior Bowl. He's a really interesting guy. He's a former high school track star, long jump, 23 feet. Which I think was 4.5 inches away from shattering a 44 old school record. Tyrese Knight out of UTEP is someone that I think is going to have a really big week this year at the He had a great year at UTEP, by the way. Something like 140 tackles, 6 sacks. He also he's going to run the 40 in the low 4.5 is what I've been told. That would place him in like the 96th percentile. By the way, among all off-ball linebackers. And then one of those corners that I think is going to be a big riser, and I'm confident he's going to make me look smart a few days from now, is Carlton Johnson out of Fresno State. Okay, it's a guy no one's talking about enough. He's taken a long winding road to this point. I believe started at the JUCO ranks, was at Riverside City College, went to Southern Utah, ended up at Fresno State, had a good year this year, career high 4 picks. Look, out of all the combine invites, every player, every position, a lot of track stars, as we all know, right, in their background. He ran the fastest 4x100 meter relay out of anyone there, 40.29, okay, the fastest time out of anyone. He hit 22 miles per hour at the Senior Bowl in January. That's one of the fastest times in Senior Bowl history, at least since they started tracking it in 2018 through Zebra technology. He actually surpassed it. He was over 22 miles per hour. This is a guy that's going to run 4.3. I think, from all the information I've gathered. He could run the fastest 40. I mean, that probably bumps him up if he does. But that right now is a day 3 corner that Titans should have their eyes on.
Justin Melo, the Draft Network and Broadway Sports Media, speaking my language with the 100-meter times. I love it this morning. Justin, another guy who clocked in at a big miles per hour spot in a game for Tennessee this year was Jaylen Wright, running back. And his run he had against Georgia, the first play of that game. As you look at him as a prospect, day 2 or day 3, how do you view his value, and how do you view the Titans' needs at running back as well as they potentially look at bringing back Derrick Henry or maybe just get someone else to complement Tyjae Spears?
Well, you talk about Jaylen Wright. There's another guy that I think is going to have a huge, huge week. You talked about track. He ran the 55-meter dash in 6.29 seconds and the 100-meter in 10.85. Okay, he's a candidate to run the fastest 40. I think, among all the running backs. And I think a 4.3 is probably within the realm of possibility. He had a great year this year. I don't got to tell you guys or the audience that's listening, surpassed 1,000 yards for the first time in his career. He's a versatile home run threat. The long speed, I think, speaks for itself. This running back class, we're still sorting through it, right? I don't think there's a first-round pick in the class, and I don't think there's an obvious candidate that's going to be the first one off the board. Who's to say Jaylen Wright can't elevate himself into the round 2 by running the fastest 40. When I look at the Titans' need at the position, I'm very intrigued by how they're going to address it. As much as I love Tyjae Spears, I'd be fairly stunned if he was ever a three-down back that could handle the workload that Derrick Henry handled once upon a time, right? I think you're always going to want a second guy, maybe a sort of more of a banger between the tackles, a bigger body type. If they don't re-sign Derrick Henry, there are a lot of those types in free agency that they can probably get good value on. I look at guys, I'll put my hand up, guys that had better years than I ever thought they'd have, like Zach Moss with the Colts. Titans learned that firsthand the first time they played them. Devin Singletary with the Houston Texans. I never saw a whole lot out of him in Buffalo. Had a fantastic year. He hits free agency. Another one that I think makes a lot of sense if they do want to pursue one as an unrestricted free agent, and maybe a lot less dollars than what Derrick Henry might be getting even at his age, is Gus Edwards with the Baltimore Ravens. I think that's a guy that would be an outstanding compliment to Tajay Spears. So I'm curious to see how they address the position. I don't necessarily know that they'll draft one for a second year in a row, especially right now with the limited capital they have. Then again, I go back on that and I think you could probably get one in the 6th or 7th round, right? That value, especially at a non-premium position that you think pairs nicely with with Tajay Spears. I look at the kid from Wisconsin, Braylon Allen. I think he's going to have a big combine. He power cleans 406 pounds, by the way. Bench press is 365. He is a big, big boy. He runs a 10-yard split in 1:49. He is way too big to be running that kind of time. So I think they'll have lots of options if it's not Derrick Henry.
Just real quick, is Cooper DeJean legit, and will he hurt himself by not working out this week at the Combine?
I wish that he was working out at the Combine. It's a shame that he's not, because he was going to put up big numbers. He won the state's long jump championship, 23 feet, 7.5 inches. He ran the 100 meters in 11:16. Once ran a 20-yard sprint at 2:39. So I think he was going to have a really good week. People were thinking he was going to run 4.3. So I was a little disappointed that he's not working out. When I watch the tape, I'll admit I've got a couple more questions and hesitations. There was a corner there we talked a lot about last year, Riley Moss, that I believe ended up going in the top 100. I had similar concerns. A lot of zone coverage on that tape, a lot of it. You talk to corners at the Senior Bowl, every scout asked them the same question: how you feel about playing man? This is a man coverage league, okay? And there's a lot of time for Riley Moss to figure that out, but he didn't make the impact in year one with the Broncos that people thought he might make as a top 100 pick. I've got similar questions about Cooper and his exposure to press man. I wish they played it more at Iowa.
Mm. He is Justin Melo, the Draft Network, Broadway Sports Media, covering the Titans. If you're not following him draft time, you're not doing draft right. You've got to follow this guy. He is outstanding covering the NFL draft and covering the league. Justin, really good stuff, man. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure as always.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Justin.
Yes, sir.
Thanks,
There's Justin Melo with us this morning. Some things to dive into there that he brings up that I think are interesting. Plus, Marvin Harrison Jr. making a very surprising combine decision to some. We'll talk about it next.